Ego boundary collapse. Ego boundary collapse refers to a psychological phenomenon where an individual's sense of self becomes temporarily or permanently blurred, weakened, or dissolved. The ego boundary represents the psychological barrier that separates our internal sense of self from the external world and other people. When this boundary collapses, a person may experience difficulty distinguishing between their own thoughts, feelings, and identity versus those of others or their environment. This phenomenon can manifest in various ways and intensities. In mild cases, someone might find themselves unusually influenced by others' emotions, taking on characteristics or behaviors that aren't typically their own, or feeling an overwhelming sense of empathy that becomes difficult to manage. They might struggle to maintain their personal opinions when confronted with opposing viewpoints, not because they've been convinced, but because their sense of individual identity has become unstable. More severe instances of ego boundary collapse can occur during intense emotional states, trauma, certain mental health conditions, or altered states of consciousness. During these episodes, individuals might experience depersonalization, where they feel disconnected from their own body or thoughts, or derealization, where the external world seems unreal or dreamlike. Some people report feeling as though they're merging with their surroundings or other people, losing the clear distinction between where they end and the world begins. The collapse can be triggered by various factors including extreme stress, sleep deprivation, substance use, meditation practices taken to extremes, or underlying psychological conditions such as borderline personality disorder or dissociative disorders. In therapeutic contexts, some individuals might experience temporary ego boundary dissolution during intensive emotional processing or breakthrough moments in therapy. While ego boundary collapse can be distressing and disorienting, it's important to understand that healthy ego boundaries exist on a spectrum. Some degree of flexibility in these boundaries is actually beneficial for emotional intelligence, empathy, and meaningful relationships. The ability to temporarily lower these boundaries allows us to connect deeply with others, experience art and music more profoundly, and engage in creative activities. However, chronic or severe ego boundary collapse can significantly impact daily functioning, relationships, and overall mental health. Treatment typically involves helping individuals rebuild and strengthen their sense of self through various therapeutic approaches, including cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, or specialized trauma treatments depending on the underlying cause. Recovery often focuses on developing mindfulness skills, establishing healthy boundaries in relationships, practicing self-care routines that reinforce personal identity, and learning to recognize early warning signs of boundary dissolution. With proper support and treatment, individuals can learn to maintain flexible yet stable ego boundaries that allow for both personal autonomy and meaningful connections with others. Infinite corridor illusion. Infinite corridor illusion is a psychological phenomenon where an individual perceives or experiences the sensation of being trapped in an endless, repeating pathway or space that seems to extend infinitely without resolution or escape. This illusion can occur both as a visual perceptual experience and as a metaphorical psychological state where someone feels stuck in repetitive thought patterns or life situations that appear to have no end or exit. From a perceptual standpoint, the infinite corridor illusion often manifests in architectural spaces with repetitive elements such as long hallways lined with identical doors, mirrors facing each other creating endless reflections, or staircases that seem to continue indefinitely. The brain's pattern recognition system becomes confused by the repetitive visual information, creating a sense that the space extends far beyond its actual physical boundaries. This can trigger feelings of disorientation, anxiety, or even panic as the mind struggles to process what appears to be an impossible spatial configuration. Psychologically, the infinite corridor illusion represents a mental state where individuals feel trapped in cyclical thinking patterns or life circumstances. People experiencing this might describe feeling like they're walking down the same mental pathway repeatedly, encountering the same problems, thoughts, or emotions without finding resolution or progress. This can occur during periods of depression, anxiety, obsessive-compulsive disorder, or when facing persistent life challenges that seem insurmountable. The illusion can be particularly intense during altered states of consciousness, including dreams, meditation, or under the influence of certain substances. In these states, the normal spatial and temporal processing of the brain becomes altered, making infinite or impossible spaces feel completely real and immediate. Some individuals report recurring dreams of endless corridors, tunnels, or pathways that create lasting feelings of unease even after waking. This phenomenon also appears in various cultural and artistic contexts, often symbolizing feelings of existential dread, monotony, or the human condition of feeling trapped by routine and repetition. Literature, film, and art frequently use infinite corridor imagery to represent psychological states of confusion, fear, or the search for meaning and escape. The experience can be particularly distressing because it challenges our fundamental understanding of space, progress, and resolution. Humans are naturally oriented toward goals and endpoints, so the perception of infinite continuation without resolution conflicts with our basic psychological needs for closure and achievement. Treatment for persistent infinite corridor experiences typically involves addressing underlying anxiety or mood disorders, practicing grounding techniques that help establish spatial and temporal orientation, and cognitive behavioral strategies that help break repetitive thought patterns. Mindfulness practices can be particularly helpful as they teach individuals to observe their mental experiences without becoming trapped within them. Understanding this illusion helps normalize what can be a very frightening experience and provides framework for developing coping strategies when faced with seemingly endless challenges or repetitive mental states. Reverse perspective thinking. Reverse perspective thinking is a cognitive technique and psychological approach where individuals deliberately flip their viewpoint to examine situations, problems, or concepts from the completely opposite angle or standpoint than their initial perspective. This mental process involves consciously stepping outside one's natural thought patterns and assumptions to gain new insights and understanding through intentional cognitive reversal. The technique operates on the principle that our default thinking patterns often limit our ability to see complete pictures or find creative solutions. When we approach problems from our habitual perspective, we may miss crucial information, alternative solutions, or important considerations that become apparent only when we deliberately reverse our viewpoint. This isn't simply about considering other people's opinions, but rather about fundamentally inverting our own cognitive approach to create new pathways of understanding. In practical application, reverse perspective thinking might involve asking questions like, what if the opposite were true, or how would this situation look if I approached it from the end result backward to the beginning? For instance, instead of thinking about how to achieve success, someone might consider what failure looks like and work backward to identify what to avoid. Rather than focusing on what they want in a relationship, they might examine what they absolutely don't want and use that clarity to guide their choices. This cognitive approach has significant therapeutic value in addressing negative thought patterns, anxiety, and depression. When someone is caught in cycles of catastrophic thinking, reverse perspective thinking can help them examine their fears from the opposite angle. Instead of focusing on everything that could go wrong, they might explore what could go right, or instead of dwelling on their perceived inadequacies, they might consciously focus on their strengths and capabilities. The technique also proves valuable in creative problem-solving and innovation. Many breakthrough ideas emerge when people abandon conventional approaches and deliberately think in reverse. This might involve starting with the desired outcome and working backward to identify necessary steps, or examining what everyone else is doing and deliberately choosing the opposite approach. In interpersonal relationships, reverse perspective thinking can dramatically improve communication and empathy. Instead of focusing solely on how others' actions affect them, individuals can flip the perspective to consider how their own behavior might be impacting others. This reversal often reveals blind spots in self-awareness and creates opportunities for more meaningful connections. The practice requires conscious effort and patience, as our brains naturally resist departing from established thought patterns. However, with regular practice, reverse perspective thinking becomes a valuable mental tool that enhances flexibility, creativity, and problem-solving abilities. It helps break mental rigidity and opens pathways to solutions that might never emerge through conventional thinking approaches. This technique is particularly effective when combined with mindfulness practices, as it requires present-moment awareness to catch oneself in habitual thinking patterns before consciously choosing to reverse the perspective. Shadow thought integration. Shadow thought integration is a psychological process derived from Carl Jung's concept of the shadow, involving the conscious acknowledgement, acceptance, and incorporation of repressed, denied, or disowned aspects of one's thoughts and personality. This therapeutic approach recognizes that every individual possesses thoughts, impulses, and characteristics that they consider unacceptable or incompatible with their conscious self-image, and these rejected elements form what Jung called the psychological shadow. The shadow typically contains thoughts and impulses that contradict our idealized self-concept or societal expectations. These might include aggressive thoughts, selfish desires, sexual fantasies, feelings of jealousy, or any other mental content that we've learned to suppress because it doesn't align with how we want to see ourselves or how we believe others expect us to be. Rather than these thoughts disappearing, they become relegated to the unconscious where they continue to influence behavior in indirect and often problematic ways. Shadow thought integration involves deliberately bringing these hidden aspects into conscious awareness without judgment or immediate attempts to eliminate them. The process begins with honest self-reflection to identify thoughts, feelings, or impulses that create shame, guilt, or anxiety when they arise. This might include recognizing moments of anger that seem disproportionate, noticing judgmental thoughts about others that reveal our own insecurities, or acknowledging desires that conflict with our moral self-image. The integration process doesn't mean acting on every impulse or thought, but rather developing a more complete and honest relationship with one's full psychological reality. When shadow thoughts are acknowledged and accepted as part of human experience, they lose much of their unconscious power to create internal conflict, project onto others, or manifest in destructive behaviors. This work often reveals that shadow thoughts contain valuable information about unmet needs, authentic values, or areas requiring personal growth. For example, someone who suppresses all aggressive thoughts might discover that underneath lies a healthy need for boundaries and self-advocacy. A person who denies any selfish impulses might find that some degree of self-care and personal priority setting is necessary for psychological health. The integration process typically involves several stages: recognition of the shadow material, acceptance without judgment, understanding the underlying needs or messages, and finding healthy ways to honor these aspects without causing harm to oneself or others. This might involve expressing assertiveness in appropriate contexts, acknowledging and processing difficult emotions, or finding creative outlets for aspects of personality that don't fit conventional expectations. Shadow thought integration often occurs naturally in therapy when individuals feel safe enough to explore their complete psychological landscape. It can also be facilitated through journaling, meditation, dream work, or artistic expression that allows hidden aspects of personality to emerge and be witnessed with compassion. The ultimate goal is psychological wholeness and authenticity, where individuals can access their full range of human experience while making conscious choices about how to express different aspects of themselves in healthy and constructive ways. Imagined sound barrier. Imagined sound barrier is a psychological phenomenon where individuals experience a perceived auditory boundary or limitation that exists primarily in their mind rather than in objective reality. This barrier manifests as the belief or sensation that certain sounds, voices, or auditory experiences are blocked, muffled, or inaccessible, even when no physical impediment exists. The barrier can affect both the perception of external sounds and the individual's ability to produce sounds, such as speaking or singing. This psychological construct often develops through past experiences, trauma, or conditioning that creates mental associations between certain auditory situations and danger, embarrassment, or failure. For example, someone who experienced public speaking anxiety might develop an imagined sound barrier that makes them feel as though their voice becomes trapped or distorted when attempting to speak in group settings. The barrier isn't physically real, but the psychological experience feels completely authentic and can significantly impact behavior and communication. The imagined sound barrier frequently appears in performance contexts, where musicians, singers, or public speakers report feeling as though there's an invisible wall preventing their sound from reaching the audience effectively. They might describe sensations of their voice bouncing back at them, feeling muffled, or seeming to disappear entirely despite objective evidence that others can hear them clearly. This creates a disconnect between their internal experience and external reality. In some cases, the barrier manifests as selective auditory filtering, where individuals unconsciously block out certain types of sounds or conversations. This might occur in social situations where someone feels overwhelmed or anxious, leading their mind to create a protective barrier that filters out potentially threatening or stressful auditory information. While this can serve as a psychological defense mechanism, it can also interfere with effective communication and social connection. The phenomenon can also relate to internal dialogue and self-expression. Some people experience an imagined sound barrier around their ability to hear their own thoughts clearly or express their authentic voice. This might manifest as feeling like there's static, interference, or a wall between their true thoughts and their ability to articulate them, either internally or externally. Treatment for imagined sound barriers typically involves helping individuals recognize the psychological nature of their experience while validating that the sensations feel real and significant. Cognitive behavioral therapy can help identify and challenge the underlying beliefs that maintain the barrier. Exposure therapy might gradually help individuals test their perceptions against reality in safe, controlled environments. Sound therapy, vocal exercises, and breathing techniques can help rebuild confidence in one's auditory and vocal abilities. Mindfulness practices that focus on present-moment auditory awareness can help distinguish between imagined barriers and actual auditory experiences. Understanding this concept helps normalize experiences that might otherwise seem confusing or pathological, while providing a framework for addressing auditory-related anxiety and communication difficulties through targeted therapeutic interventions. Reverse inner dialogue. Reverse inner dialogue is a psychological technique and phenomenon where individuals consciously flip or invert their internal self-talk patterns to create new perspectives, challenge limiting beliefs, or access different aspects of their psyche. This process involves deliberately changing the direction, tone, or content of the ongoing mental conversation that most people experience throughout their daily lives, essentially turning their inner voice inside out or backward to reveal hidden insights and alternative viewpoints. Traditional inner dialogue typically flows in predictable patterns based on our established beliefs, past experiences, and conditioned responses. We might habitually engage in self-criticism, worry about future events, or replay past conversations in ways that reinforce existing mental frameworks. Reverse inner dialogue disrupts these automatic patterns by consciously choosing to speak to ourselves in ways that contradict our usual internal narrative. The technique can take several forms. One approach involves literally reversing the emotional tone of inner dialogue, so someone who typically engages in harsh self-criticism might deliberately practice speaking to themselves with compassion and encouragement. Another method involves reversing the temporal direction of internal conversations, starting with desired outcomes and working backward through the mental steps that might lead there, rather than starting with current problems and projecting forward to potential difficulties. Some practitioners engage in reverse inner dialogue by consciously adopting the voice of someone who believes in them, speaking to themselves as a supportive friend, mentor, or loved one might. This reversal helps access perspective and wisdom that becomes obscured when filtered through their usual self-critical or anxious internal voice. The technique can reveal how dramatically our inner dialogue shapes our emotional state and behavioral choices. Reverse inner dialogue proves particularly valuable for addressing negative thought patterns, anxiety, and depression. When someone catches themselves in cycles of catastrophic thinking or self-doubt, they can consciously reverse the dialogue to explore what their wisest, most compassionate self might say instead. This isn't about positive thinking or denial, but rather about accessing the full range of internal perspectives available to them. The practice can also enhance creativity and problem-solving by reversing the usual logical flow of internal problem-solving dialogue. Instead of starting with problems and seeking solutions, someone might begin by imagining successful outcomes and allowing their inner dialogue to work backward through the steps that made success possible. This reversal often reveals possibilities that forward-thinking approaches miss. In therapeutic contexts, reverse inner dialogue helps individuals recognize how much power their internal narrative holds over their emotional experience and behavior. By consciously practicing different ways of speaking to themselves, people can develop more flexible and supportive relationships with their own minds. The technique requires practice and patience, as our habitual inner dialogue patterns are deeply ingrained. However, regular practice of reverse inner dialogue can lead to greater self-awareness, emotional regulation, and access to internal resources that support psychological well-being and personal growth. Mind maze navigation. Mind maze navigation is a psychological concept that describes the complex mental process of finding one's way through intricate patterns of thoughts, emotions, memories, and associations that can feel labyrinthine and confusing. This phenomenon occurs when individuals become lost in their own mental landscape, struggling to find clear pathways from problems to solutions, or from confusion to clarity, as their minds present multiple branching paths that seem to lead in circles or to dead ends. The mind maze typically manifests during periods of intense stress, decision-making, or when processing complex emotional experiences. Unlike linear thinking, where thoughts follow logical sequences from point A to point B, mind maze navigation involves mental processes that branch, loop, intersect, and sometimes contradict each other. Individuals might find themselves starting with one thought or problem, only to discover that their mental exploration has led them through a series of associations that bring them back to where they started, or leave them feeling more confused than when they began. This psychological maze can be constructed from various mental elements including past traumas, conflicting values, competing desires, fear-based thoughts, and complex relationship dynamics. Each pathway in the maze represents different possible interpretations, solutions, or emotional responses to a situation. The challenge lies not in the existence of multiple pathways, but in the difficulty of navigating them effectively to reach desired mental destinations. Common experiences of mind maze navigation include overthinking situations where simple solutions exist, getting caught in analysis paralysis when making decisions, or finding that attempts to solve one problem lead to the discovery of multiple additional problems. People might describe feeling mentally stuck, going in circles, or unable to see the forest for the trees. The maze can feel particularly dense when dealing with relationships, career decisions, or personal identity questions where multiple valid perspectives exist simultaneously. Effective mind maze navigation requires developing specific mental skills and strategies. These include learning to recognize when one has entered the maze versus engaging in productive reflection, developing tolerance for uncertainty and complexity, and practicing techniques that help maintain orientation within complicated mental terrain. Mindfulness practices can serve as an internal compass, helping individuals notice when they've become lost and need to step back to gain perspective. Therapeutic approaches to mind maze navigation often involve mapping the mental landscape to identify recurring patterns, dead-end pathways, and effective routes through complex psychological terrain. Cognitive behavioral therapy can help identify thinking traps that create false pathways, while narrative therapy might help individuals recognize the stories they tell themselves that shape the structure of their personal mental maze. The goal isn't to eliminate complexity from mental processing, but rather to develop confidence and skill in navigating that complexity without becoming overwhelmed or lost. This includes learning when to persist in exploring difficult mental territory and when to step back and approach problems from entirely different angles. False memory induction. False memory induction is a psychological phenomenon where individuals develop vivid, detailed memories of events that never actually occurred, or remember events differently from how they actually happened. This process can occur naturally through various cognitive mechanisms or can be deliberately triggered through suggestion, leading people to genuinely believe in the reality of these fabricated or distorted memories with the same confidence they hold for authentic recollections. The human memory system is far more malleable and reconstructive than most people realize. Rather than functioning like a video recorder that captures and stores exact replicas of experiences, memory operates more like a creative editor that reconstructs past events each time they're recalled. During this reconstruction process, new information, suggestions, emotions, and expectations can become integrated into the memory, potentially altering or completely fabricating details that feel completely real to the person experiencing them. False memory induction can happen through several mechanisms. Leading questions can plant suggestions that later become incorporated into memory as if they were original experiences. For example, asking someone, "How fast was the car going when it smashed into the other vehicle?" might lead them to remember a more violent collision than actually occurred, even if the original question used a gentler word like "contacted." Repeated exposure to false information, whether through conversations, media, or therapeutic suggestions, can gradually build false memories that feel increasingly real over time. Social and emotional factors significantly influence false memory formation. People are more susceptible to developing false memories about events that fit their existing beliefs, expectations, or emotional needs. Memories that provide explanations for current problems or validate existing narratives about oneself or others are particularly vulnerable to distortion or fabrication. The emotional intensity associated with false memories can actually make them feel more real than accurate but less emotionally charged recollections. This phenomenon has important implications for therapeutic settings, legal proceedings, and personal relationships. In therapy, well-meaning attempts to help clients recover supposedly repressed memories can sometimes lead to the creation of false memories that feel completely authentic. In legal contexts, eyewitness testimony can be contaminated by leading questions, media exposure, or discussions with others, creating false memories that can significantly impact judicial outcomes. False memory induction also occurs in everyday life through normal social processes. Family stories, photographs, and repeated conversations can create memories of events that never happened or significantly alter memories of events that did occur. Children are particularly susceptible to false memory induction due to their developing cognitive abilities and high responsiveness to adult suggestions. Understanding false memory induction helps people develop more realistic expectations about memory accuracy and reliability. This knowledge can promote more careful approaches to situations where memory accuracy is crucial, encourage critical thinking about recovered memories, and foster awareness of how our recollections of the past may be shaped by present circumstances and influences. Silent counting reversal. Silent counting reversal is a psychological technique and cognitive phenomenon where individuals deliberately reverse their internal counting patterns or experience involuntary backward counting sequences that can serve therapeutic, meditative, or disruptive purposes depending on the context. This process involves consciously or unconsciously engaging in numerical sequences that move in the opposite direction from normal forward counting, creating unique mental states and cognitive effects that can influence attention, anxiety, and consciousness. Traditional counting typically moves forward in predictable sequences and serves as a foundational cognitive skill that helps organize thoughts, manage anxiety, and maintain focus. Silent counting reversal disrupts these familiar patterns by intentionally moving backward through numerical sequences, which requires greater cognitive effort and attention than forward counting. This increased mental demand can serve various psychological and therapeutic functions. As a therapeutic technique, silent counting reversal can effectively interrupt anxious thought patterns, racing minds, or overwhelming emotional states. When someone begins counting backward from a specific number, such as 100 down to 0, their mind must engage more actively with the counting process than it would with forward counting. This increased cognitive load can redirect attention away from anxiety-provoking thoughts and ground individuals in the present moment through focused mental activity. The technique proves particularly valuable for managing panic attacks, insomnia, or situations where the mind feels out of control. The backward counting requires enough concentration to disrupt runaway thought processes while remaining simple enough to execute even during high-stress situations. Some practitioners find that counting backward by irregular intervals, such as 7s or 13s, creates even greater focus and distraction from anxious thoughts. Silent counting reversal can also occur involuntarily during altered states of consciousness, extreme stress, or certain psychological conditions. Some individuals report experiencing automatic backward counting during meditation, just before falling asleep, or during dissociative episodes. These spontaneous reversals might represent the mind's attempt to regulate itself or could indicate underlying neurological or psychological processes that merit attention. In some contexts, persistent involuntary counting reversal can become problematic, particularly if it interferes with daily functioning or becomes compulsive. This might occur in individuals with obsessive-compulsive tendencies where the backward counting becomes a ritual that must be completed to reduce anxiety, potentially creating more distress than relief. The cognitive effects of silent counting reversal extend beyond simple distraction. The technique can induce mild altered states of consciousness, promote relaxation, and enhance present moment awareness. Some meditation traditions incorporate backward counting as a method for deepening focus and moving beyond ordinary thinking patterns. Research suggests that counting backward activates different neural pathways than forward counting, potentially explaining why the technique can feel more engaging and effective for managing difficult mental states. The increased cognitive demand appears to engage executive functioning areas of the brain that can help regulate emotional and attentional processes. Understanding silent counting reversal provides individuals with a simple yet effective tool for self-regulation while also helping recognize when counting behaviors might indicate underlying psychological concerns that could benefit from professional attention. Thought Eraser Protocol. Thought Eraser Protocol is a psychological technique and cognitive process designed to systematically remove, neutralize, or deactivate persistent unwanted thoughts, traumatic memories, or intrusive mental content that interferes with psychological well-being and daily functioning. This protocol represents a structured approach to mental decluttering that goes beyond simple distraction or suppression, instead focusing on fundamentally altering the neural pathways and emotional associations connected to problematic thought patterns. The protocol operates on the understanding that thoughts gain power and persistence through repetition, emotional charge, and the attention we give them. Rather than fighting against unwanted thoughts, which often strengthens them through resistance, the thought eraser protocol involves systematic steps to drain these thoughts of their emotional energy and cognitive significance. This process requires deliberate mental actions that interrupt the automatic cycles that keep unwanted thoughts active and intrusive. The technique typically begins with identifying specific thoughts, memories, or mental patterns that require erasure. This might include traumatic flashbacks, obsessive worries, self-critical inner dialogue, or recurring negative predictions about the future. Once identified, the protocol involves several stages of cognitive intervention designed to progressively weaken the thought's hold on the mind. One common approach involves visualization techniques where individuals imagine the unwanted thought written on various surfaces, then systematically erase, dissolve, or destroy these mental images. This might involve visualizing thoughts written on chalkboards that get erased, words on paper that get burned, or digital text that gets deleted. The physical act of imagining erasure helps create new neural associations that compete with the original thought pattern. Another component of the protocol involves emotional neutralization, where individuals practice observing the unwanted thought without the typical emotional reaction it generates. Through repeated exposure in a controlled, safe mental environment, the thought gradually loses its emotional charge and becomes less intrusive. This process is similar to systematic desensitization used in treating phobias, but applied to internal mental content rather than external situations. The thought eraser protocol also incorporates replacement strategies where erased thoughts are systematically replaced with more adaptive, helpful, or neutral mental content. This prevents the mental vacuum that might otherwise be filled by the return of unwanted thoughts and helps establish new neural pathways that support psychological well-being. Advanced applications of the protocol might involve working with core beliefs, identity-level thoughts, or deeply ingrained mental patterns that require more intensive intervention. This work often occurs within therapeutic relationships where professional guidance helps ensure safety and effectiveness during the erasure process. The protocol requires consistent practice and patience, as deeply established thought patterns don't disappear immediately. Success often involves gradually reducing the frequency, intensity, and emotional impact of unwanted thoughts rather than achieving complete elimination. The goal is to develop greater control over mental content and reduce the suffering associated with persistent problematic thoughts. False awakening simulation. False awakening simulation is a psychological phenomenon and therapeutic technique that involves the experience or deliberate creation of the sensation of waking up from sleep when one is actually still dreaming or in an altered state of consciousness. This concept encompasses both the naturally occurring false awakening experiences that happen during sleep cycles and the intentional simulation of these experiences for therapeutic, creative, or consciousness exploration purposes. In its natural form, false awakening occurs when dreamers believe they have woken up and begun their normal daily routine, only to actually wake up later and realize that their perceived awakening was itself part of a dream. These experiences can be remarkably vivid and detailed, often including familiar environments like the dreamer's bedroom, bathroom routines, getting dressed, or checking the time. The simulation feels completely real in the moment, making the eventual true awakening particularly disorienting and sometimes distressing. The simulation aspect involves deliberately recreating or practicing these false awakening experiences while awake as a form of mental training or therapeutic intervention. This technique helps individuals develop greater awareness of consciousness states, improve dream recall, and build skills for lucid dreaming. Practitioners might visualize themselves going through awakening routines while maintaining awareness that they are actually awake, creating a bridge between conscious and unconscious mental states. False awakening simulation proves particularly valuable for individuals who experience recurring nightmares or sleep-related anxiety. By practicing the experience of false awakening in a controlled, safe environment, people can develop greater comfort with the disorienting aspects of these experiences and reduce the distress they might cause. The technique also helps build metacognitive awareness, the ability to think about thinking, which can be valuable for managing various psychological challenges. The phenomenon relates closely to reality testing and consciousness monitoring. People who experience frequent false awakenings often develop habits of checking clocks, looking at their hands, or performing other reality checks to determine whether they are awake or dreaming. The simulation technique incorporates these reality testing practices as part of building greater awareness of consciousness states. Therapeutic applications of false awakening simulation include treating sleep disorders, anxiety related to sleep and dreaming, and helping individuals who feel disconnected from their dream life. The technique can also support creative endeavors by helping artists, writers, and inventors access the unique mental states that occur at the boundary between sleeping and waking consciousness. Some practitioners use false awakening simulation as a meditation technique, exploring the nature of consciousness by deliberately blurring the boundaries between different awareness states. This practice can lead to insights about the constructed nature of reality and the flexibility of conscious experience. The simulation requires practice and patience, as the ability to maintain awareness while recreating sleep-wake transitions develops gradually over time with consistent effort and attention to the subtle shifts in consciousness that characterize these liminal states. The imaginary mirror technique. The imaginary mirror technique is a psychological intervention and self-reflection method where individuals create a mental visualization of themselves looking into a mirror that exists only in their imagination, allowing them to observe, interact with, and gain insights from their reflected self in ways that transcend the limitations of physical mirrors. This technique leverages the power of visualization and internal dialogue to facilitate self-awareness, emotional processing, and personal growth through imagined self-confrontation. Unlike looking into an actual mirror, which reflects only physical appearance and current emotional expressions, the imaginary mirror can reveal deeper psychological states, hidden aspects of personality, and internal conflicts that might not be visible on the surface. Practitioners visualize themselves standing before this mental mirror and observe not just their physical reflection, but also their emotional state, energy levels, unspoken thoughts, and even aspects of themselves they typically keep hidden from conscious awareness. The technique involves several components that make it particularly powerful for psychological work. First, the imaginary mirror can reflect different versions of the self, including past selves, future selves, or idealized versions that represent personal goals and aspirations. This flexibility allows individuals to explore various aspects of their identity and development in ways that static physical reflection cannot accommodate. They might visualize their younger self offering wisdom about resilience, or their future self providing guidance about current decisions. Therapeutic applications of the imaginary mirror technique include building self-compassion, processing difficult emotions, and developing greater self-acceptance. When individuals struggle with self-criticism or negative self-perception, they can use the imaginary mirror to practice seeing themselves through more compassionate eyes. The technique allows them to separate the observer from the observed, creating psychological distance that can facilitate more objective and kind self-evaluation. The imaginary mirror also serves as a tool for internal dialogue and problem-solving. Practitioners can engage in conversations with their reflected self, asking questions, seeking advice, or working through conflicts. This process often reveals insights and perspectives that remain hidden during normal self-reflection, as the mirror format creates a sense of dialogue with another person even though both participants are aspects of the same individual. For individuals working on personal development or behavior change, the imaginary mirror technique can help visualize and rehearse new ways of being. They might practice seeing themselves as confident, calm, or assertive, using the mirror to reinforce positive identity changes and build familiarity with desired personality traits before implementing them in real-world situations. The technique proves particularly valuable for people who struggle with self-awareness or have difficulty accessing their emotional states. The visual and interactive nature of the imagined mirror can make internal experiences more concrete and accessible, helping individuals identify feelings, needs, and motivations that might otherwise remain unconscious. Advanced applications might involve creating mirrors that reflect different aspects of personality, relationships, or life circumstances, allowing for complex self-exploration and integration work. The flexibility of imagination means these mirrors can adapt to whatever psychological work needs to be accomplished. Cognitive loop breaking. Cognitive loop breaking is a psychological technique and intervention strategy designed to interrupt and disrupt repetitive, self-perpetuating thought patterns that trap individuals in cycles of rumination, worry, or obsessive thinking. This process involves identifying when the mind has become stuck in circular thinking patterns and implementing specific strategies to break free from these mental loops that prevent progress, problem solving, and emotional well-being. Cognitive loops typically form when the mind encounters a problem, concern, or unresolved issue and begins repeatedly cycling through the same thoughts, questions, or scenarios without reaching resolution or new insights. These loops can involve worrying about future events, replaying past conversations or mistakes, or obsessing over decisions that need to be made. The repetitive nature of these thought patterns creates the illusion of productive mental work while actually preventing the fresh perspective and creative thinking necessary for genuine problem solving. The breaking process requires first developing awareness of when cognitive loops have formed. This involves recognizing the signs that thoughts have become repetitive and circular rather than progressive and solution-oriented. Common indicators include feeling mentally exhausted without having reached any conclusions, noticing the same thoughts recurring throughout the day, or experiencing increased anxiety or frustration despite extensive mental effort. The key is learning to distinguish between productive reflection and unproductive rumination. Once a cognitive loop is identified, various breaking techniques can be employed. Pattern interruption involves deliberately disrupting the thought cycle through physical movement, changing environments, or engaging in activities that require focused attention. This might include taking a walk, doing jumping jacks, or switching to a completely different task that demands cognitive resources. The goal is to break the neural pathway that has become stuck in repetition. Cognitive reframing represents another breaking strategy where individuals consciously shift their perspective on the looped content. Instead of continuing to think about a problem in the same way, they might ask different questions, consider alternative viewpoints, or examine the issue from a completely different angle. This approach helps escape the mental groove that keeps thoughts cycling in the same pattern. Time-limiting techniques involve setting specific boundaries around how much mental energy will be devoted to particular concerns. Rather than allowing thoughts to loop endlessly, individuals might designate specific times for problem solving or worry, then deliberately redirect attention when these time limits are reached. This creates structure around mental processing and prevents loops from consuming excessive cognitive resources. The technique also involves developing tolerance for uncertainty and incompleteness. Many cognitive loops persist because individuals feel compelled to resolve every question or reach definitive conclusions about uncertain situations. Learning to accept that some issues cannot be immediately resolved helps break the compulsive need to keep thinking about them repeatedly. Cognitive loop breaking proves particularly valuable for managing anxiety, depression, and obsessive-compulsive tendencies. The technique helps individuals regain control over their mental processes and develop more flexible, adaptive thinking patterns that support psychological well-being and effective problem-solving rather than perpetuating mental stuckness and emotional distress. Time displacement visualization. Time displacement visualization is a psychological technique that involves mentally transporting oneself to different temporal locations, either forward into the future or backward into the past, to gain new perspectives on current situations, reduce emotional intensity, or access wisdom and insights that are not available from present moment thinking. This method leverages the mind's ability to create vivid mental experiences across different time periods to facilitate healing, problem solving, and personal growth. The technique operates on the principle that our perception of problems, emotions, and life circumstances changes dramatically depending on our temporal perspective. Issues that feel overwhelming in the present moment often appear more manageable when viewed from the vantage point of the future, while current challenges may seem less significant when compared to past difficulties we have already overcome. Time displacement visualization harnesses these natural shifts in perspective by deliberately moving consciousness to different temporal locations. Forward time displacement involves visualizing oneself at various points in the future, from weeks or months ahead to years or even decades later. From these future perspectives, individuals can examine their current concerns and often discover that many present worries will resolve naturally over time or prove less important than they currently appear. This technique proves particularly valuable for managing anxiety about upcoming events, relationship conflicts, or career decisions that feel overwhelming in the present moment. The process might involve imagining oneself 1 year in the future, looking back at current problems with the wisdom and distance that time provides. Many people discover that from this future perspective, current difficulties appear as temporary challenges that contributed to personal growth rather than insurmountable obstacles. This shift in temporal perspective can significantly reduce anxiety and provide motivation to persist through difficult periods. Backward time displacement involves mentally returning to earlier periods in life to access resources, strengths, and insights that may have been forgotten or overlooked. This might include reconnecting with the resilience displayed during previous challenges, remembering core values that provided guidance during difficult decisions, or accessing the creativity and curiosity that characterized earlier developmental stages. Therapeutic applications of time displacement visualization include trauma processing, where individuals might visit their past selves to provide comfort, protection, or wisdom that was unavailable during the original traumatic experience. This technique can help heal childhood wounds by allowing the adult self to offer support and understanding to the younger self who experienced difficulty or pain. The visualization technique also supports decision-making by allowing individuals to mentally travel to potential futures and experience the consequences of different choices. This temporal exploration can provide valuable information about which paths align with personal values and long-term goals, helping inform present-moment decisions with future wisdom. Time displacement visualization requires practice to become effective, as the mind must learn to create vivid, meaningful experiences across different temporal locations. The technique works best when combined with relaxation methods that facilitate the deep focus necessary for immersive visualization experiences. The Forgotten Name Paradox. The forgotten name paradox is a psychological phenomenon that occurs when individuals experience the peculiar situation of having a name, word, or piece of information hovering just beyond conscious recall, creating a state of knowing that they know something while simultaneously being unable to access that knowledge. This paradox represents a fascinating aspect of memory retrieval where the meta-memory, or knowledge about one's own memory, remains intact while the specific content becomes temporarily inaccessible, creating a frustrating cognitive experience that most people find deeply familiar. The paradox typically manifests as the tip-of-the-tongue phenomenon, where someone is absolutely certain they know a particular name or word, can often recall associated information such as the first letter, number of syllables, or related concepts, but cannot retrieve the specific item from memory. This creates a unique cognitive state where individuals exist in a liminal space between knowing and not knowing, experiencing the certainty of possession alongside the frustration of inaccessibility. What makes this experience particularly intriguing is that the forgotten information often returns spontaneously at unexpected moments, sometimes hours or days later, usually when the person has stopped actively trying to remember. This delayed retrieval suggests that the information was never truly forgotten but rather temporarily blocked by some interference in the memory retrieval process. The harder someone tries to remember, the more elusive the information often becomes, creating a counterintuitive relationship between effort and success in memory recall. The paradox extends beyond simple name or word retrieval to encompass broader patterns of memory and consciousness. People might experience knowing that they have experienced something before without being able to recall specific details, or feeling familiar with a person, place, or situation while being unable to place where or when they encountered it previously. These experiences highlight the complex, multi-layered nature of memory and the various ways that information can be stored and retrieved in human consciousness. Psychologically, the forgotten name paradox often triggers anxiety, frustration, or obsessive searching behaviors as individuals attempt to bridge the gap between their metamemory knowledge and their inability to access specific content. The experience can become particularly distressing when it involves important information such as the names of people, places, or concepts that feel central to one's identity or professional competence. The paradox also reveals important insights about the reconstructive nature of memory and the difference between recognition and recall. Often, when the forgotten name is provided by someone else or encountered in writing, immediate recognition confirms that the information was indeed stored in memory, highlighting the distinction between having information available in memory versus having it accessible for voluntary retrieval. Therapeutic approaches to managing the distress associated with forgotten name paradoxes often involve accepting the temporary nature of memory blocks, developing strategies for indirect recall through association and context, and reducing the anxiety that can interfere with natural memory retrieval processes. Understanding this paradox helps normalize these common cognitive experiences and reduces the self-criticism that often accompanies memory lapses. The phenomenon ultimately demonstrates the remarkable complexity of human memory systems and the mysterious ways that consciousness interfaces with stored information. Cognitive peripheral vision. Cognitive peripheral vision is a psychological concept that describes the mind's ability to maintain awareness of thoughts, emotions, sensations, and mental processes that exist at the edges of conscious attention, similar to how physical peripheral vision allows us to detect movement and objects outside our direct visual focus. This mental capacity involves developing sensitivity to the subtle background elements of consciousness that typically remain unnoticed while maintaining primary focus on immediate tasks or concerns. Just as physical peripheral vision provides important information about our environment without requiring direct visual attention, cognitive peripheral vision allows individuals to monitor their internal mental landscape for important signals, patterns, or changes that might require attention. This includes noticing shifts in mood, emerging thoughts that might be relevant to current problems, physical sensations that indicate stress or relaxation, and intuitive insights that arise spontaneously during focused mental activity. The development of cognitive peripheral vision requires training the mind to expand its awareness beyond the narrow focus of immediate conscious attention. Most people naturally focus their mental energy on whatever task or concern demands their immediate attention, often missing important information that exists in the background of consciousness. Learning to maintain peripheral awareness while engaged in focused activities represents a significant expansion of cognitive capacity and self-awareness. This skill proves particularly valuable for emotional regulation and mental health maintenance. By developing sensitivity to the early warning signs of stress, anxiety, or depression that often first appear in the periphery of consciousness, individuals can intervene before these conditions become overwhelming. Subtle changes in energy levels, thought patterns, or physical sensations that might otherwise go unnoticed can serve as important indicators of psychological state when detected through cognitive peripheral vision. Creative applications of this concept involve maintaining awareness of spontaneous ideas, associations, and insights that often arise at the edges of focused thinking. Many breakthrough ideas emerge not through direct problem-solving efforts but through peripheral awareness of connections and possibilities that bubble up from unconscious mental processing. Artists, writers, and innovators often develop strong cognitive peripheral vision to catch these fleeting inspirations before they disappear. In interpersonal relationships, cognitive peripheral vision allows individuals to notice subtle emotional undercurrents, nonverbal communications, and relational dynamics that might not be explicitly stated. This peripheral awareness of social and emotional information can significantly enhance empathy, communication skills, and relationship satisfaction by providing access to the full spectrum of interpersonal experience rather than just the obvious surface content. Meditation and mindfulness practices naturally develop cognitive peripheral vision by training attention to become more flexible and expansive. Rather than narrowly focusing on a single object of attention, practitioners learn to maintain broad, open awareness that can simultaneously encompass multiple aspects of present moment experience without becoming overwhelmed or losing focus. The skill requires practice and patience, as it involves learning to hold multiple levels of awareness simultaneously without allowing peripheral information to disrupt primary focus. This balance between focused attention and peripheral awareness represents an advanced form of cognitive flexibility that can enhance both productivity and well-being. Inner dialogue scrambling. Inner dialogue scrambling is a psychological technique and phenomenon where the normal flow of internal conversation becomes disrupted, fragmented, or deliberately randomized to break habitual thought patterns, interrupt negative self-talk, or create space for new perspectives to emerge. This process can occur naturally during states of stress, fatigue, or altered consciousness, or can be intentionally induced as a therapeutic intervention to address problematic internal narratives that have become rigid or destructive. The inner dialogue represents the ongoing conversation that most people maintain with themselves throughout their waking hours, involving commentary, planning, problem-solving, and emotional processing. This internal voice typically follows predictable patterns based on personality, past experiences, and learned ways of thinking. When these patterns become negative, repetitive, or counterproductive, inner dialogue scrambling can serve as a powerful intervention to disrupt automatic mental processes and create opportunities for change. Deliberate scrambling techniques involve consciously fragmenting or randomizing the internal conversation to break established neural pathways. This might include mixing up sentence structure, substituting random words, speaking internal dialogue in different voices or languages, or intentionally creating nonsensical combinations of thoughts and phrases. The disruption creates cognitive dissonance that forces the mind to engage with familiar content in unfamiliar ways, often revealing new perspectives or breaking free from mental ruts. The technique proves particularly valuable for individuals struggling with harsh self-criticism, anxiety loops, or obsessive thought patterns. When negative inner dialogue has become automatic and persistent, scrambling can interrupt these patterns long enough for alternative thoughts and perspectives to emerge. The randomization process often reduces the emotional charge associated with familiar negative self-talk by making it sound strange or absurd rather than convincing and authoritative. Spontaneous inner dialogue scrambling can occur during periods of extreme stress, sleep deprivation, or overwhelming emotion when normal cognitive processing becomes disrupted. While this can feel disorienting or concerning, it often represents the mind's natural attempt to break free from patterns that have become stuck or counterproductive. Understanding this as a potentially adaptive process can reduce anxiety about temporary disruptions in normal thinking patterns. Therapeutic applications include helping individuals recognize how much their inner dialogue influences their emotional state and behavior. By experiencing their internal voice in scrambled form, people often gain perspective on how arbitrary and changeable their mental commentary actually is, reducing its power to control mood and self-perception. This recognition can lead to greater flexibility in choosing which internal voices to listen to and which to ignore. The scrambling process can also reveal underlying beliefs, fears, or desires that normally remain hidden beneath the surface of conscious dialogue. When familiar thought patterns are disrupted, deeper material often emerges that provides valuable insights for personal growth and therapy. This can include forgotten memories, suppressed emotions, or creative ideas that were previously overshadowed by louder mental voices. Creative applications involve using dialogue scrambling to generate new ideas, break through writer's block, or access unconventional solutions to problems. By disrupting normal thought processes, the technique can help bypass mental censorship and logical constraints that sometimes limit creative expression and innovative thinking. Identity fragmentation. Identity fragmentation is a psychological phenomenon where an individual's sense of self becomes divided, compartmentalized, or split into multiple distinct aspects that may operate independently or in conflict with each other. This process involves the breakdown of the typically integrated sense of personal identity into separate fragments or parts, each potentially containing different values, memories, emotions, or behavioral patterns that may feel disconnected from the person's core sense of who they are. The fragmentation process can occur as a natural response to trauma, overwhelming stress, or conflicting life demands that create internal contradictions too difficult for the psyche to reconcile within a single, coherent identity. When faced with experiences that challenge fundamental beliefs about oneself or the world, the mind may create separate compartments to hold incompatible information, emotions, or memories. This division can serve as a protective mechanism that allows individuals to function in different contexts while shielding parts of themselves from overwhelming or conflicting experiences. Mild forms of identity fragmentation are actually quite common and can be adaptive. Most people experience some degree of identity shifting across different roles, relationships, and contexts. The professional self may operate quite differently from the intimate partner self, which may differ again from the parent's self or the creative self. These variations become fragmentation when the different aspects feel disconnected, conflicting, or unknown to each other, creating internal confusion or distress. More severe fragmentation can occur following significant trauma, particularly when traumatic experiences happen during critical developmental periods. The mind may create separate identity fragments to contain traumatic memories, emotions, or survival strategies that feel incompatible with the person's primary sense of self. These fragments might hold different ages, genders, personality traits, or skill sets, and may emerge in specific situations or under particular stressors. The experience of identity fragmentation can manifest in various ways. Individuals might feel like they have multiple different selves that don't recognize or communicate with each other. They may experience periods where they feel like strangers to themselves, unable to connect with their own memories, emotions, or behaviors from different time periods or contexts. Some people describe feeling like they're wearing masks or playing roles that don't reflect their true identity, yet being unable to identify what that true self actually is. Fragmentation can also occur around specific life areas such as work, relationships, sexuality, or creativity. A person might develop a professional identity that feels completely separate from their personal identity, leading to feelings of inauthenticity or internal conflict. Romantic relationships might activate identity fragments that feel foreign or uncomfortable, creating confusion about desires, boundaries, or emotional responses. Therapeutic work with identity fragmentation typically involves helping individuals recognize and communicate between different aspects of themselves, fostering integration rather than elimination of various parts. The goal is not to create a single, uniform identity but rather to develop internal cooperation and communication between different aspects of the self. This process often involves exploring the origins and functions of different fragments, understanding how they develop to serve protective or adaptive purposes. Integration work may include dialogue techniques where different parts of the self communicate with each other, creative expression that allows various aspects to be explored and expressed, and mindfulness practices that help individuals observe their different internal states without judgment or the need to immediately resolve contradictions. Memory echo suppression. Memory echo suppression is a psychological process and therapeutic technique that involves reducing or eliminating the persistent reverberations of traumatic or distressing memories that continue to intrude into present-moment consciousness long after the original events have occurred. This phenomenon addresses the way certain memories create ongoing echoes that replay automatically in the mind, causing continued emotional disturbance, anxiety, or disruption to daily functioning even when the triggering events are no longer present or threatening. Memory echoes differ from normal memory recall in that they occur involuntarily and often with the same emotional intensity as the original experience. These echoes can be triggered by seemingly unrelated stimuli, sensory experiences, or environmental cues that somehow connect to the stored traumatic material. The suppression process involves developing techniques to reduce the automatic activation of these memory echoes and diminish their emotional impact when they do arise. The echoing quality of certain memories occurs because traumatic or highly emotional experiences often get encoded differently in the brain than routine memories. Instead of being integrated into normal autobiographical memory systems, these experiences may remain in a state of hyperactivation, ready to replay with full sensory and emotional detail whenever triggered. This creates a situation where past events continue to feel present and threatening, interfering with the individual's ability to distinguish between past and present safety. Suppression techniques typically involve a combination of cognitive, somatic, and exposure-based interventions designed to reduce the memory's emotional charge and automatic activation. This might include systematic desensitization where individuals gradually expose themselves to memory triggers in safe, controlled environments while practicing relaxation and grounding techniques. The goal is to retrain the nervous system to respond to these triggers with less reactivity over time. Cognitive approaches to memory echo suppression involve changing the narrative context around traumatic memories, helping individuals develop more adaptive interpretations of past events that reduce their ongoing emotional impact. This might include recognizing personal strength and resilience demonstrated during difficult times, understanding the broader context that contributed to traumatic events, or developing self-compassion for past decisions made under extreme circumstances. Somatic suppression techniques focus on the physical sensations and bodily responses associated with memory echoes. Since traumatic memories often include strong physical components, addressing the body's response to memory triggers can significantly reduce their overall impact. This might involve breathing techniques, progressive muscle relaxation, or movement practices that help discharge physical tension associated with memory activation. The suppression process requires careful balance between reducing unwanted memory intrusions and maintaining access to important information that memories might contain. Complete memory suppression is rarely the goal, as memories often contain valuable learning and meaning-making opportunities. Instead, the focus is on reducing the automatic, involuntary nature of memory echoes while preserving the ability to consciously access and process memory content when appropriate. Advanced suppression techniques might involve working with the sensory components of memory echoes, such as visual flashbacks, auditory replays, or physical sensations that accompany memory activation. By systematically addressing each sensory modality, individuals can reduce the vividness and immediacy of memory echoes while maintaining cognitive access to the information when needed. The ultimate goal of memory echo suppression is to restore choice and control over memory activation, allowing individuals to remember past events without being overwhelmed by them and to engage fully with present-moment experiences without constant interference from the past. Negative space visualization. Negative space visualization is a psychological technique that involves focusing attention on the empty spaces, absences, or voids around thoughts, emotions, experiences, or problems rather than on the content itself. This approach draws inspiration from art and design principles where negative space, the area around and between subjects, becomes as important as the positive space occupied by the main elements. In psychological applications, this technique helps individuals gain new perspectives by examining what is not present, not happening, or not being experienced, often revealing insights that remain hidden when focusing solely on manifest content. The technique operates on the principle that our attention naturally gravitates toward what is present, active, or problematic, often overlooking the significance of what is absent or quiet. By deliberately shifting focus to these negative spaces in psychological experience, individuals can discover resources, possibilities, and insights that exist in the gaps between their usual focal points. This shift in perspective can be particularly valuable when dealing with overwhelming emotions, persistent problems, or situations where direct approaches have proven ineffective. In emotional processing, negative space visualization might involve focusing on moments of calm between periods of anxiety, exploring the qualities of silence that exist between intrusive thoughts, or examining the peaceful spaces that surround areas of psychological pain. Rather than trying to eliminate negative emotions or experiences, this approach helps individuals recognize that these experiences exist within larger contexts that include neutral or positive spaces. This recognition can provide relief and perspective during difficult emotional periods. The technique proves particularly valuable for individuals who feel consumed by their problems or emotions. When someone reports feeling constantly anxious, for example, negative space visualization would involve exploring the moments, however brief, when anxiety is not present. These spaces of non-anxiety often contain important information about what conditions support well-being and can serve as resources for expanding moments of peace and stability. Creative applications involve using negative space awareness to enhance problem-solving and innovation. By examining what is not being considered, not being said, or not being attempted, individuals often discover new approaches and possibilities that were previously invisible. This technique can help break through mental limitations and conventional thinking patterns by revealing unexplored territories of possibility. In relationships, negative space visualization can help identify what is not being communicated, what needs are not being met, or what positive qualities exist in the spaces between conflicts. This approach often reveals strengths and resources in relationships that become overshadowed by problems or tensions. Couples might discover shared values, moments of connection, or underlying love that exists in the quiet spaces between their difficulties. The visualization process typically involves relaxation techniques followed by guided attention to the spaces around identified concerns or experiences. This might include imagining the physical space around emotions in the body, visualizing the time periods before and after problems occur, or exploring the mental space that exists between thoughts. The key is developing comfort with emptiness and absence rather than feeling compelled to fill every space with content or analysis. Advanced applications might involve exploring the negative space around identity, examining who one is not in order to better understand who one is, or using absence as a doorway to presence. This philosophical dimension of the technique connects to contemplative traditions that use emptiness as a pathway to fuller understanding and experience. Thought compression. Thought compression is a cognitive technique that involves condensing complex mental processes, emotions, or experiences into simplified, manageable mental representations. This psychological concept operates on the principle that our minds can overwhelm us with excessive detail, analysis, and rumination, leading to mental fatigue and decision paralysis. By learning to compress our thoughts, we essentially create mental shortcuts that preserve the essential meaning while reducing cognitive load. The process works by identifying the core elements of a complex thought pattern or emotional experience and distilling them into their most fundamental components. Rather than allowing our minds to spiral through endless variations, details, and tangential connections, thought compression teaches us to extract the primary message or feeling and represent it in a more streamlined mental format. This technique is particularly valuable for individuals who struggle with overthinking, anxiety, or information overload. In practice, thought compression might involve taking a complicated worry about work performance and reducing it to a simple acknowledgement such as, "I want to do well." A complex relationship conflict could be compressed into, "We need better communication." The goal is not to oversimplify important issues but to prevent our minds from becoming trapped in unproductive loops of excessive analysis. This technique draws from cognitive behavioral therapy principles, where thoughts are recognized as mental events that can be observed and modified rather than absolute truths that must be exhaustively analyzed. Thought compression also shares similarities with mindfulness practices, as it requires present-moment awareness of our mental processes and the ability to step back from automatic thinking patterns. The benefits of mastering thought compression include improved mental clarity, reduced anxiety, enhanced decision-making capabilities, and greater emotional regulation. When we compress overwhelming thoughts into their essential components, we create space for more productive thinking and action. This technique is particularly useful in high-stress situations where clear thinking is crucial but mental resources are limited. Regular practice of thought compression can lead to improved mental efficiency and reduced psychological strain. It helps develop what psychologists call cognitive flexibility, which is the ability to adapt our thinking patterns to different situations and challenges. Over time, individuals who practice thought compression often report feeling less mentally scattered and more capable of focusing on what truly matters in any given situation. Ego Dissociation Drill. Ego dissociation drill is a psychological exercise designed to create temporary distance between an individual's conscious awareness and their ego-driven thoughts, emotions, and behavioral patterns. This technique involves deliberately stepping outside of one's usual self-perception to observe thoughts, feelings, and reactions from a more detached, objective perspective. The drill helps practitioners recognize that their ego, while important for daily functioning, is not the totality of their identity or consciousness. The process begins with developing the ability to observe one's thoughts and emotions as if watching them from outside oneself. This creates what psychologists call metacognitive awareness, which is the capacity to think about thinking. During the drill, individuals practice viewing their ego responses, defensive mechanisms, and automatic reactions as separate phenomena rather than fundamental aspects of their identity. This separation allows for greater self-understanding and emotional regulation. The technique draws heavily from Eastern philosophical traditions, particularly Buddhist concepts of non-self and witness consciousness, while incorporating Western psychological understanding of ego function and identity formation. The drill does not aim to eliminate the ego, which serves important protective and organizational functions, but rather to reduce over-identification with ego-driven patterns that may cause suffering or limit personal growth. Practitioners typically engage in specific exercises such as referring to themselves in third person during self-reflection, imagining they are observing their life from an elevated perspective, or visualizing their thoughts and emotions as clouds passing through the sky of consciousness. These techniques help create psychological distance from immediate emotional reactions and habitual thought patterns. The benefits of regular ego dissociation practice include increased emotional resilience, reduced reactivity to criticism or conflict, enhanced creativity through freedom from self-limiting beliefs, and improved decision-making capacity. When individuals can step back from their ego-driven responses, they often discover more flexible and effective ways of responding to challenges. This drill is particularly valuable for individuals who struggle with perfectionism, people-pleasing, or intense emotional reactivity. It helps develop what therapists call emotional regulation skills and can be especially beneficial for those working through trauma, anxiety disorders, or relationship difficulties. The practice requires careful guidance and should be approached gradually, as too much dissociation can become counterproductive or emotionally destabilizing. The ultimate goal is not permanent detachment but rather the development of a flexible relationship with one's ego, where it can be engaged when helpful and observed when problematic. Attention scattering. Attention scattering is a psychological technique that involves deliberately dispersing focused attention across multiple stimuli or mental processes simultaneously, rather than maintaining concentrated focus on a single point. This approach challenges the conventional wisdom that sustained, singular focus is always optimal for mental performance and emotional well-being. Instead, attention scattering recognizes that there are specific situations where distributed awareness can be more beneficial than concentrated attention. The technique works by training the mind to comfortably hold multiple streams of awareness without becoming overwhelmed or losing track of important information. Rather than forcing attention into a narrow beam, practitioners learn to expand their conscious awareness like a wide-angle lens, taking in multiple elements of their internal and external environment simultaneously. This creates a state of relaxed alertness where attention flows naturally between different focal points without the strain of forced concentration. Attention scattering is particularly valuable for individuals who experience anxiety, obsessive thinking, or mental rigidity. When someone becomes fixated on a particular worry, fear, or problem, their attention often becomes trapped in a narrow tunnel of focus that amplifies distress and limits creative problem solving. By deliberately scattering attention, practitioners can break free from these restrictive mental patterns and gain access to broader perspectives and solutions. The practice involves exercises such as simultaneously attending to physical sensations, environmental sounds, visual elements, and internal thoughts without trying to analyze or control any of them. This might include feeling the weight of your body in a chair while listening to background noise, while noticing the color of nearby objects, while observing passing thoughts. The goal is not to process all information deeply but to maintain gentle awareness of multiple streams simultaneously. This technique draws from mindfulness meditation practices, particularly open monitoring meditation, where practitioners maintain choiceless awareness of whatever arises in consciousness. It also incorporates principles from Gestalt therapy, which emphasizes the importance of maintaining awareness of the whole field of experience rather than focusing solely on individual elements. The benefits of attention scattering include reduced mental tension, increased cognitive flexibility, enhanced creativity, and improved emotional regulation. When attention is scattered appropriately, individuals often report feeling less mentally constrained and more adaptable to changing circumstances. This technique can be especially helpful for creative work, problem solving, and managing overwhelming emotions. However, attention scattering requires practice to master effectively. Initially, it may feel chaotic or unfocused, but with time, practitioners develop the ability to maintain distributed awareness while still being able to concentrate when necessary. The key is learning when to scatter attention and when to focus it, developing a flexible attention system that can adapt to different situations and needs. Mental noise cancellation. Mental noise cancellation is a cognitive technique designed to filter out unnecessary mental chatter, intrusive thoughts, and psychological static that interferes with clear thinking and emotional well-being. This concept operates on the principle that our minds are constantly processing multiple streams of information, much of which is irrelevant, repetitive, or counterproductive to our current goals and mental state. Just as noise-canceling headphones eliminate unwanted ambient sound, mental noise cancellation helps individuals identify and reduce the mental interference that clouds their consciousness. The technique involves developing the ability to distinguish between meaningful mental content and psychological noise. Mental noise includes repetitive worry loops, self-critical commentary, random memory fragments, anticipatory anxiety, and the constant stream of judgmental thoughts that often run in the background of consciousness. This mental static can drain cognitive resources, increase stress levels, and make it difficult to access deeper wisdom and intuitive insights. Mental noise cancellation works through a process of recognition, categorization, and selective filtering. Practitioners first learn to identify when their minds are engaged in noisy, unproductive thinking patterns. They then develop techniques for acknowledging this noise without engaging with it, allowing it to fade into the background while maintaining focus on more relevant and constructive mental processes. This is not about suppressing thoughts, which often backfires, but rather about changing one's relationship to mental chatter. The practice draws from various therapeutic approaches including cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness meditation, and acceptance and commitment therapy. It incorporates the understanding that we are not our thoughts and that we have the capacity to observe our mental processes without being overwhelmed by them. The technique also utilizes principles from information processing theory, recognizing that attention is a limited resource that can be allocated more efficiently. Specific exercises might include labeling intrusive thoughts as mental noise, and returning attention to the present moment, using breathing techniques to create space between consciousness and mental chatter, or employing visualization methods where unnecessary thoughts are imagined as radio static being turned down. Some practitioners find it helpful to designate specific times for processing worries and concerns, keeping these thoughts contained rather than allowing them to infiltrate all mental activities. The benefits of mental noise cancellation include improved concentration, reduced anxiety, enhanced creativity, better decision-making, and increased mental peace. When individuals successfully filter out psychological noise, they often discover that their minds are naturally clearer and more focused. This technique is particularly valuable for people who struggle with racing thoughts, chronic worry, or attention difficulties. Regular practice of mental noise cancellation can lead to what psychologists describe as improved executive function and enhanced metacognitive awareness. Over time, practitioners often report feeling less mentally overwhelmed and more capable of accessing their inner wisdom and creative insights when needed. Psychic anchor release. Psychic anchor release is a psychological technique focused on identifying and releasing deeply embedded mental and emotional attachments that keep individuals tethered to limiting beliefs, past experiences, or dysfunctional patterns. These psychic anchors function like invisible chains that restrict personal growth, emotional freedom, and the ability to adapt to new circumstances. The term psychic in this context refers to the psychological and emotional realm rather than supernatural phenomena, encompassing the deep-seated mental structures that anchor us to particular ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. These anchors typically form during significant emotional experiences, particularly those that occur during childhood or other formative periods. They might include attachment to a specific identity, fear of abandonment rooted in early relationships, rigid beliefs about success or failure, or emotional patterns learned from family dynamics. Unlike surface-level habits or conscious preferences, psychic anchors operate at a deeper psychological level, often influencing behavior and decision-making in ways that individuals may not fully recognize. The release process involves several stages, beginning with identification of the anchor through self-reflection, therapy, or mindfulness practice. This requires honest examination of recurring patterns, emotional triggers, and areas of life where growth feels blocked or restricted. Once identified, the anchor must be understood in its original context, recognizing how it may have served a protective or adaptive function in the past, even if it no longer serves the individual's current needs. The actual release process combines cognitive understanding with emotional processing and somatic awareness. This might involve techniques such as guided visualization where the anchor is imagined as a physical object being removed, emotional release work that allows suppressed feelings to surface and be processed, or somatic practices that help release tension and trauma stored in the body. The goal is not to eliminate important aspects of personality or identity, but to release rigid attachments that prevent authentic self-expression and growth. Psychic anchor release draws from various therapeutic modalities including psychodynamic therapy, which explores how past experiences shape current behavior, somatic therapy, which addresses how trauma and emotional patterns are stored in the body, and transpersonal psychology, which recognizes the importance of spiritual and transcendent aspects of healing. The technique also incorporates principles from attachment theory, understanding how early relational patterns create internal working models that influence adult relationships and self-perception. The benefits of successful psychic anchor release include increased emotional freedom, enhanced creativity, improved relationships, greater resilience in facing life challenges, and a stronger sense of authentic self. When individuals release limiting anchors, they often report feeling lighter, more flexible, and more capable of responding to life from a place of choice rather than compulsion. However, this process requires patience and often professional support, as psychic anchors frequently serve important psychological functions and their release can initially create feelings of vulnerability or disorientation. The process is typically gradual, allowing individuals to develop new coping strategies and support systems as old patterns are released. Mental frequency shift. Mental frequency shift is a psychological technique that involves consciously altering one's mental state and cognitive patterns by changing the underlying frequency or vibrational quality of thoughts and emotions. This concept draws from the metaphor of radio frequencies, where tuning to different stations provides access to entirely different content and experiences. In psychological terms, mental frequency refers to the dominant patterns of thought, emotion, and attention that characterize an individual's current state of consciousness. The technique operates on the understanding that human consciousness exists at different levels or frequencies, each associated with distinct qualities of experience, perception, and capability. Lower frequencies might be characterized by anxiety, depression, anger, or victim consciousness, while higher frequencies are associated with states such as gratitude, compassion, creativity, and expanded awareness. By learning to consciously shift between these frequencies, individuals can access different resources, perspectives, and solutions to life challenges. Mental frequency shifting involves several key components including awareness of current mental state, understanding of desired state, and specific techniques for facilitating the transition. The process begins with developing sensitivity to the subtle qualities that characterize different mental frequencies, such as the physical sensations, emotional tones, and thought patterns associated with various states of consciousness. This requires cultivating what psychologists call interoceptive awareness, which is the ability to perceive internal bodily signals and emotional states. The shift process itself utilizes various tools including breath work, visualization, movement, sound, or specific cognitive reframing techniques. For example, shifting from anxiety to calm might involve slowing the breath, relaxing physical tension, and consciously choosing thoughts that promote peace and stability. Shifting from victim consciousness to empowerment might involve changing posture, using affirming language, and focusing attention on personal capabilities and resources rather than limitations and obstacles. This technique draws from multiple psychological and spiritual traditions including cognitive behavioral therapy, which recognizes the power of thoughts to influence emotions and behavior, neurolinguistic programming, which explores how language and mental imagery affect experience, and various meditation and consciousness practices that work with different states of awareness. The approach also incorporates understanding from positive psychology about the importance of cultivating beneficial mental states. The benefits of mastering mental frequency shifting include increased emotional resilience, enhanced creativity and problem-solving ability, improved relationships through access to more compassionate and understanding states, and greater overall life satisfaction. When individuals can consciously shift their mental frequency, they become less reactive to external circumstances and more capable of maintaining optimal states regardless of situational challenges. Regular practice of mental frequency shifting can lead to improved emotional regulation and what researchers call psychological flexibility, which is the ability to adapt one's behavior to changing circumstances and long-term values. Over time, practitioners often report feeling more in control of their inner experience and less dependent on external conditions for their sense of well-being and effectiveness. Future self-hypnosis. Future self-hypnosis is a psychological technique that combines hypnotic states with visualization of one's future self to create powerful motivation, clarity, and behavioral change. This method involves entering a relaxed, focused state of consciousness and then engaging in detailed mental conversations or interactions with a projected version of oneself from the future. The technique leverages the brain's ability to create vivid mental simulations and the psychological power of connecting with aspirational versions of ourselves. The process begins with entering a hypnotic or deeply relaxed state through progressive muscle relaxation, focused breathing, or other induction techniques. Once in this receptive state, practitioners visualize meeting their future self at a specific point in time, whether months, years, or decades ahead. This future self is imagined as having achieved desired goals, overcome current challenges, and embodied the qualities and wisdom that the present self seeks to develop. During these imagined encounters, individuals engage in meaningful dialogue with their future self, asking for guidance, wisdom, and perspective on current challenges. The future self might offer advice about decisions, share insights about what truly matters, or provide encouragement during difficult times. This technique taps into the unconscious mind's capacity for creative problem solving and accessing inner wisdom that may not be readily available to the conscious mind during normal waking states. Future self-hypnosis draws from several psychological principles including visualization techniques used in sports psychology and performance enhancement, the concept of possible selves from social psychology, which explores how imagined future identities influence current behavior, and hypnotherapy methods that access subconscious resources for healing and change. The technique also incorporates understanding from narrative therapy, which recognizes the power of story and identity in shaping behavior and experience. The visualization process involves creating rich, detailed sensory experiences of interacting with the future self. Practitioners might imagine the physical appearance of their future self, the environment where they meet, the emotional tone of the interaction, and specific conversations or exchanges of wisdom. The more vivid and emotionally engaging the experience, the more powerful its impact on current behavior and motivation. This technique is particularly effective for goal setting, decision-making, overcoming self-limiting beliefs, and maintaining motivation during challenging periods. When individuals connect with their future self, they often gain clarity about their values, priorities, and the steps needed to achieve their aspirations. The future self serves as both a source of wisdom and a compelling vision that pulls the individual forward toward positive change. The benefits of regular future self-hypnosis practice include increased motivation and goal clarity, enhanced decision-making ability, reduced anxiety about the future, and stronger sense of personal agency and empowerment. Many practitioners report that these sessions provide comfort during difficult times and help maintain perspective on temporary challenges by connecting them with their longer-term vision and values. The technique requires practice to develop the ability to enter hypnotic states and create vivid visualizations, but even beginners often find meaningful insights and motivation through this process. The key is approaching the practice with openness and allowing the unconscious mind to contribute its wisdom and creativity to the experience. Infinite regression exercise. Infinite regression exercise is a psychological technique that involves systematically examining the deeper layers of thoughts, beliefs, and motivations by continuously asking, why, or what lies beneath this, until reaching fundamental core elements of consciousness or experience. This method creates a deliberate descent into the underlying structures of mental and emotional patterns, revealing the often hidden foundations that drive behavior, decision-making, and emotional responses. The exercise operates on the principle that surface-level thoughts and feelings are typically supported by deeper layers of belief, memory, and psychological conditioning. By engaging in methodical questioning and exploration, practitioners can uncover the root sources of their mental patterns, gaining insight into why they think, feel, and behave in particular ways. This process resembles peeling back layers of an onion, with each level of exploration revealing new depths and connections. The technique begins with identifying a specific thought, emotion, belief, or behavioral pattern that the individual wants to understand more deeply. The practitioner then asks probing questions such as, why do I think this way, what belief underlies this feeling, or where did this pattern originate? Each answer becomes the starting point for the next level of inquiry, creating a cascading exploration that moves progressively deeper into the psyche. As the regression continues, practitioners often discover connections between current patterns and past experiences, uncover limiting beliefs that operate below conscious awareness, and identify core values or fears that influence multiple areas of life. The infinite aspect refers not to literally endless exploration, but to the recognition that consciousness contains seemingly inexhaustible depths that can be explored for greater self-understanding. This technique draws from various therapeutic approaches including psychoanalytic therapy, which emphasizes uncovering unconscious material, cognitive therapy, which examines the relationship between thoughts and emotions, and philosophical inquiry methods that seek fundamental understanding through systematic questioning. The exercise also incorporates elements from Buddhist and other contemplative traditions that use inquiry as a path to deeper wisdom and self-realization. The practice requires patience, honesty, and willingness to encounter potentially uncomfortable truths about oneself. As practitioners dig deeper, they may uncover painful memories, contradictory beliefs, or aspects of their personality that they prefer not to acknowledge. However, this deeper awareness often leads to greater self-acceptance and the ability to make more conscious choices about thoughts and behaviors. Benefits of infinite regression exercise include increased self-awareness, resolution of internal conflicts, identification of limiting beliefs that can then be addressed, and development of greater emotional intelligence. When individuals understand the deeper sources of their patterns, they often find it easier to create lasting change and respond to life challenges from a place of conscious choice rather than automatic reaction. The exercise can be practiced independently through journaling and self-reflection, or with the guidance of a therapist or counselor who can help navigate deeper material safely. Regular practice develops what psychologists call psychological mindedness, which is the ability to understand and reflect upon one's own mental processes and their connection to behavior and relationships. Subconscious password reset. Subconscious password reset is a psychological technique that involves identifying and changing deeply embedded mental passwords or automatic response patterns that govern access to different aspects of personality, behavior, and emotional states. This concept uses the metaphor of computer passwords to describe how the subconscious mind operates through learned triggers, associations, and conditioned responses that either grant or deny access to various psychological resources and capabilities. These subconscious passwords typically develop through repeated experiences, emotional conditioning, and learned associations that become so automatic they operate below conscious awareness. For example, certain environmental cues might trigger anxiety responses, specific words or situations might activate self-doubt, or particular memories might unlock feelings of inadequacy or empowerment. These mental passwords determine which aspects of personality and capability become available in different situations. The reset process begins with identifying existing passwords through careful observation of automatic responses, emotional triggers, and behavioral patterns. This requires developing awareness of the subtle cues that activate different mental and emotional states. Practitioners learn to notice the connection between specific stimuli and their internal responses, recognizing patterns that may have been operating unconsciously for years. Once problematic passwords are identified, the reset process involves deliberately creating new associations and response patterns. This might include visualization techniques where new triggers are mentally rehearsed and anchored to desired states, exposure therapy where old patterns are gradually replaced with new responses, or neurolinguistic programming techniques that help establish fresh mental associations. The goal is to overwrite limiting automatic responses with more empowering and flexible patterns. The technique draws from various psychological approaches including classical and operant conditioning principles, which explain how associations and response patterns are learned and modified, cognitive behavioral therapy methods for changing automatic thoughts and responses, and neurolinguistic programming techniques for creating new mental associations. The approach also incorporates understanding from neuroscience about neural plasticity and the brain's ability to form new pathways throughout life. Subconscious password reset is particularly valuable for addressing phobias, social anxiety, performance blocks, and other situations where automatic responses interfere with desired outcomes. When individuals successfully reset limiting passwords, they often discover access to capabilities and resources that were previously blocked by unconscious conditioning. This can lead to dramatic improvements in confidence, creativity, relationships, and overall life satisfaction. The process requires patience and repetition, as subconscious patterns typically change gradually through consistent practice rather than immediate transformation. However, many practitioners report noticing shifts relatively quickly as new associations begin to take hold and old patterns lose their automatic power. The technique is most effective when combined with other therapeutic approaches and practiced consistently over time. Benefits of successful subconscious password reset include increased emotional freedom, enhanced access to personal resources and capabilities, reduced reactivity to triggering situations, and greater choice in how to respond to life challenges. When limiting passwords are reset, individuals often feel more authentic and capable of expressing their full potential rather than being constrained by outdated conditioning. Emotional desaturation. Emotional desaturation is a psychological technique that involves deliberately reducing the intensity or color saturation of overwhelming emotions without eliminating them entirely, creating space for clearer thinking and more balanced responses. This concept draws from the visual metaphor of adjusting color saturation in photography, where turning down the intensity creates a more muted, manageable image while preserving all the essential information and detail. The technique recognizes that emotions often become so intense that they overwhelm cognitive functioning, decision-making ability, and behavioral choice. When emotions are highly saturated, they can dominate consciousness and make it difficult to access rational thinking, creative solutions, or alternative perspectives. Emotional desaturation provides a middle path between emotional suppression, which can be psychologically harmful, and emotional overwhelm, which can be paralyzing and destructive. The process involves several key steps including recognition of emotional intensity, acceptance of the emotion's presence and validity, and then conscious reduction of its overwhelming quality while maintaining awareness of its essential message. This is not about eliminating emotions or pretending they do not exist, but rather about creating optimal emotional intensity for effective functioning and decision-making. Practitioners learn various techniques for achieving emotional desaturation including breathing exercises that help regulate the nervous system, visualization methods where emotions are imagined as having adjustable intensity settings, cognitive reframing that provides perspective on emotional experiences, and somatic practices that help release physical tension associated with intense emotions. The goal is to maintain emotional authenticity while reducing counterproductive intensity. This technique draws from multiple therapeutic approaches including dialectical behavior therapy, which teaches distress tolerance and emotion regulation skills, mindfulness-based interventions that help individuals observe emotions without being overwhelmed by them, and cognitive behavioral therapy methods for managing intense emotional responses. The approach also incorporates understanding from effective neuroscience about how emotions can be modulated through conscious intervention. Emotional desaturation is particularly valuable for individuals who struggle with emotional intensity, whether due to trauma, anxiety disorders, depression, or simply natural emotional sensitivity. When emotions are desaturated to manageable levels, individuals often discover that they can still access the important information and motivation that emotions provide while maintaining their ability to think clearly and respond effectively to challenges. The practice requires developing emotional awareness and the ability to recognize when emotions are becoming counterproductively intense. This involves cultivating what psychologists call emotional granularity, which is the ability to distinguish between different emotional states and intensities. With practice, Individuals can learn to catch intense emotions early and apply desaturation techniques before becoming overwhelmed. Benefits of mastering emotional desaturation include improved emotional regulation, enhanced decision-making under stress, better relationships through more balanced emotional responses, and increased resilience in facing life challenges. When individuals can modulate their emotional intensity appropriately, they often report feeling more in control of their inner experience and more capable of responding to situations from a place of wisdom rather than reactive intensity. The technique is not about becoming emotionally numb or disconnected, but rather about developing the flexibility to experience emotions at optimal intensities for different situations and goals. Intentional Forgetting Method. Intentional forgetting method is a psychological technique that involves deliberately releasing specific memories, thought patterns, or emotional associations that no longer serve an individual's well-being or growth. This approach challenges the common assumption that all memories and experiences should be preserved and instead recognizes that some mental content can become psychologically burdensome, limiting, or counterproductive to healing and personal development. The method operates on the understanding that memory is not simply passive storage but an active, reconstructive process that can be consciously influenced. Every time we recall a memory, we potentially alter it slightly, and with intentional practice, we can choose to weaken the neural pathways associated with particular memories or their emotional charge. This is not about developing amnesia or losing important life lessons, but rather about reducing the psychological weight and automatic triggering power of specific mental content. The technique involves several components including identification of memories or thought patterns that cause ongoing distress or limitation, understanding the difference between the factual content of experiences and their emotional charge, and employing specific methods to reduce the psychological impact of targeted mental content. This might include visualization exercises where problematic memories are imagined being dissolved or transformed, cognitive reframing that changes the meaning and significance of past events, or somatic practices that help release physical tension and trauma associated with particular memories. Intentional forgetting draws from various therapeutic approaches including trauma therapy techniques that help process and integrate difficult experiences, cognitive behavioral therapy methods for challenging and changing problematic thought patterns, and neuroscience research on memory consolidation and reconsolidation. The approach also incorporates understanding from positive psychology about the importance of focusing mental resources on growth-promoting rather than limiting content. The process requires careful discernment about what should be forgotten versus what needs to be processed and integrated. Traumatic experiences, for example, may need to be therapeutically processed rather than simply forgotten, as unprocessed trauma can continue to influence behavior unconsciously. The method is most appropriate for repetitive negative thoughts, minor resentments, self-limiting beliefs, and other mental content that serves no constructive purpose in current life circumstances. Practitioners learn to distinguish between memories that contain important lessons or unfinished emotional business and those that are simply mental clutter or outdated conditioning. The goal is not to avoid responsibility for past actions or ignore important life lessons, but to release mental content that keeps individuals stuck in limiting patterns or painful emotional states that no longer serve their growth and healing. The benefits of skillful intentional forgetting include reduced psychological burden from past experiences, increased mental space for positive and creative thoughts, enhanced ability to live in the present moment, and greater emotional freedom from limiting patterns. When individuals successfully release counterproductive mental content, they often report feeling lighter, more optimistic, and more capable of creating positive change in their lives. However, this technique requires wisdom and often professional guidance to ensure that important psychological material is not prematurely discarded. The process works best when combined with other therapeutic approaches that help individuals develop healthy coping strategies and process experiences appropriately. The key is learning to forget selectively and intentionally rather than avoiding or suppressing important psychological content that needs attention and integration. Disguised affirmation loop. Disguised affirmation loop is a psychological technique that involves embedding positive affirmations and self-empowering messages within seemingly neutral or indirect communication patterns, allowing beneficial programming to bypass conscious resistance and critical filtering. This method recognizes that direct positive affirmations often trigger skepticism, inner criticism, or psychological reactance, especially in individuals who struggle with low self-esteem or have deeply ingrained negative self-concepts. The technique works by disguising empowering messages within conversations, internal dialogue, or environmental cues in ways that feel natural and non-threatening to the conscious mind. Rather than stating obvious positive affirmations that might feel forced or unrealistic, the method integrates supportive messages into everyday language patterns, storytelling, metaphors, or seemingly casual observations. This allows the subconscious mind to absorb beneficial programming without triggering defensive responses. Examples of disguised affirmation loops might include framing challenges as opportunities for growth rather than threats, describing past difficulties as evidence of resilience and capability, or embedding compliments and positive observations within neutral conversations. The key is that these messages feel authentic and believable rather than artificially imposed, allowing them to gradually influence self-perception and internal dialogue patterns. The method draws from several psychological principles including cognitive behavioral therapy's focus on changing negative thought patterns, neurolinguistic programming techniques for embedded commands and indirect suggestion, and hypnotherapy approaches that utilize indirect and permissive language to bypass conscious resistance. The technique also incorporates understanding from social psychology about how repeated exposure to ideas gradually influences beliefs and attitudes. Creating effective disguised affirmation loops requires understanding the difference between direct and indirect communication, developing sensitivity to what messages feel authentic versus forced, and learning to identify opportunities for embedding positive programming within natural conversation and thought patterns. The practice involves becoming aware of automatic negative self-talk and gradually replacing it with more subtle but supportive internal dialogue. This technique is particularly valuable for individuals who have tried traditional affirmations without success, those who struggle with inner criticism or perfectionism, and people who find direct positive statements uncomfortable or unbelievable. When affirmations are disguised within natural language patterns, they can gradually shift self-perception and internal dialogue without triggering resistance or self-doubt. The loop aspect refers to the repetitive nature of the practice, where positive messages are continuously embedded within daily thoughts, conversations, and environmental interactions. Over time, these repeated exposures can create significant shifts in self-concept, confidence, and overall psychological well-being. The cumulative effect of many small, believable positive messages can be more powerful than occasional intense affirmation sessions. Benefits of mastering disguised affirmation loops include improved self-esteem, reduced inner criticism, enhanced confidence in facing challenges, and more positive overall outlook on life and personal capabilities. When individuals successfully integrate this practice, they often report that their internal dialogue becomes more supportive and encouraging naturally, without feeling forced or artificial. The technique requires patience and consistency, as the changes tend to be gradual and subtle rather than dramatic and immediate. However, this gentleness is often what makes the method effective for people who have struggled with more direct approaches to positive thinking and self-improvement. Mental cinema pause. Mental cinema pause is a psychological technique that involves temporarily stopping the continuous stream of mental imagery, internal narratives, and emotional reactions to create space for conscious choice and clearer perception. This method treats the mind like a movie theater where thoughts, memories, fantasies, and emotional stories play continuously, often without conscious direction or control. The pause function allows individuals to step outside the automatic flow of mental content and observe it from a more detached, empowered perspective. The technique recognizes that much of human psychological suffering comes from being unconsciously caught up in mental movies that may be inaccurate, outdated, or emotionally charged versions of reality. These internal films often run automatically, featuring storylines about past events, future scenarios, interpersonal conflicts, or self-critical narratives that can trigger stress, anxiety, depression, or other emotional difficulties. By learning to pause this mental cinema, individuals can break free from automatic reactive patterns and choose more consciously how to respond to situations. The pause process involves developing the ability to recognize when the mind is running problematic mental movies, consciously interrupting the flow of these internal narratives, and creating a moment of stillness or spaciousness before choosing how to proceed. This might involve techniques such as taking conscious breaths, focusing attention on present moment sensory experience, or simply saying, pause, internally when caught up in unhelpful mental storylines. During the pause, individuals can assess whether the mental movie they were watching serves their well-being and goals, choose to continue with the current narrative, select a different mental movie that is more empowering or accurate, or simply remain in the peaceful space of the pause itself. This creates what psychologists call response flexibility, which is the ability to choose conscious responses rather than reacting automatically to mental content. Mental cinema pause draws from several therapeutic and contemplative approaches including mindfulness meditation, which teaches observation of mental phenomena without automatic reaction, cognitive behavioral therapy techniques for interrupting negative thought patterns, and acceptance and commitment therapy methods for creating psychological distance from troubling mental content. The technique also incorporates understanding from neuroscience about the brain's default mode network and how meditation can influence automatic mental processes. The practice is particularly valuable for individuals who struggle with rumination, anxiety, depressive thinking patterns, or emotional reactivity. When people can successfully pause their mental cinema, they often discover that many of their psychological problems exist primarily in the stories they tell themselves rather than in objective reality. This recognition can be profoundly liberating and empowering. Regular practice of mental cinema pause can lead to increased emotional regulation, enhanced present moment awareness, reduced reactivity to stressful situations, and greater overall psychological well-being. Many practitioners report that they feel less controlled by their thoughts and emotions and more capable of choosing their mental and emotional states consciously. The technique requires developing metacognitive awareness, which is the ability to observe one's own thinking processes. This skill can be cultivated through meditation, mindfulness practice, or therapeutic work that emphasizes awareness of mental patterns. With consistent practice, the ability to pause mental movies becomes more automatic and accessible during challenging situations. Benefits include freedom from compulsive thinking patterns, increased creativity through access to mental spaciousness, improved relationships through reduced reactivity, and enhanced ability to respond to life challenges from a place of wisdom rather than automatic conditioning. Psychological distance expansion. Psychological distance expansion is a cognitive technique that involves deliberately increasing the perceived distance between oneself and challenging situations, problems, or emotional experiences to gain clearer perspective and more effective responses. This method recognizes that when individuals are psychologically too close to problems, they often become overwhelmed, lose objectivity, and struggle to access creative solutions or maintain emotional balance. By consciously expanding psychological distance, people can view situations more clearly and respond more wisely. The technique operates on several dimensions of psychological distance including temporal distance, which involves viewing situations from the perspective of how they will matter in the future, spatial distance, which means observing the situation from a physical distance or elevated viewpoint, social distance, which involves considering how others might view or handle the situation, and hypothetical distance, which means treating the situation as if it were happening to someone else, or in a different context. Psychological distance expansion works by activating what researchers call high-level construal thinking, which focuses on abstract, general principles rather than concrete, immediate details. When individuals create distance from problems, their brains naturally shift into more strategic, big-picture thinking that can reveal solutions and perspectives that are not available when caught up in immediate emotional reactions or overwhelming details. The practice involves specific exercises such as imagining how the current problem will seem in 5 or 10 years, visualizing the situation from a bird's eye view or as if watching it on a movie screen, asking how a wise mentor or admired person would handle the situation, or considering what advice would be given to a friend facing the same challenge. These techniques help create the psychological space needed for clearer thinking and more balanced emotional responses. This approach draws from several areas of psychological research including construal level theory, which studies how psychological distance affects thinking and decision-making, cognitive behavioral therapy techniques for gaining perspective on problems, and wisdom traditions that emphasize the importance of maintaining proper perspective on life challenges. The method also incorporates understanding from emotion regulation research about how distance can reduce emotional intensity. Psychological distance expansion is particularly valuable for individuals who tend to catastrophize problems, become overwhelmed by immediate circumstances, or struggle with emotional reactivity. When people can successfully create appropriate distance from their challenges, they often discover that problems that seemed insurmountable become manageable, and solutions that were previously invisible become apparent. The technique also helps individuals distinguish between what they can and cannot control, reducing wasted energy on unchangeable circumstances while focusing attention on areas where effective action is possible. This discrimination is crucial for both problem-solving effectiveness and emotional well-being, as it prevents individuals from becoming stuck in futile struggles with unchangeable realities. Regular practice of psychological distance expansion can lead to improved emotional regulation, enhanced problem-solving ability, reduced anxiety and stress, and greater resilience in facing life challenges. Many practitioners report that they feel less reactive to daily stressors and more capable of maintaining perspective during difficult periods. The key is learning to expand distance appropriately without becoming disconnected or avoidant. The goal is not to become emotionally numb or disengaged, but rather to find the optimal psychological distance that allows for both caring engagement and clear thinking. This balance enables individuals to remain connected to what matters while maintaining the perspective needed for effective action and emotional well-being. Mental gravity shift. Mental gravity shift is a psychological technique that involves consciously changing the fundamental organizing principles or gravitational forces that attract and hold together an individual's thoughts, emotions, and behavioral patterns. This concept uses the metaphor of gravity to describe how certain core beliefs, values, fears, or desires act as invisible forces that pull mental and emotional content toward them, creating consistent patterns of experience and response. Just as physical gravity determines how objects move and relate to each other in space, mental gravity determines what thoughts, emotions, and experiences individuals naturally gravitate toward or away from. These psychological gravitational fields are often established early in life through significant experiences, cultural conditioning, family dynamics, or traumatic events, and they continue to influence perception, decision-making, and behavior throughout life, usually operating below conscious awareness. The technique involves first identifying existing gravitational forces by observing recurring patterns in thoughts, emotions, relationships, and life circumstances. Common mental gravity sources include the need for approval, fear of rejection, desire for control, attachment to specific outcomes, or unconscious beliefs about self-worth, success, or safety. These forces tend to pull experiences, relationships, and opportunities that match their particular frequency or vibration. Mental gravity shift requires consciously choosing new organizing principles that better serve current goals and values. This might involve shifting from fear-based gravity to love-based gravity, from scarcity consciousness to abundance consciousness, or from victim mentality to empowerment orientation. The process involves not just changing surface-level thoughts or behaviors, but transforming the deeper magnetic qualities that attract particular types of experiences. The practice draws from various psychological and spiritual traditions including depth psychology, which recognizes the power of unconscious complexes and archetypes to organize experience, quantum psychology approaches that explore how consciousness participates in creating reality, and various wisdom traditions that teach about the law of attraction and how internal states influence external circumstances. The technique also incorporates understanding from systems theory about how changing core organizing principles can transform entire patterns of experience. Implementing mental gravity shift involves specific practices such as identifying and consciously embodying desired qualities and values, visualizing oneself as a magnet for positive experiences and opportunities, releasing attachment to old patterns through forgiveness and acceptance work, and consistently aligning thoughts, emotions, and actions with the new gravitational center. This creates what psychologists call coherence between different levels of functioning. The technique is particularly powerful for individuals who find themselves repeatedly attracting similar types of problems, relationships, or circumstances despite conscious efforts to create change. When mental gravity is shifted successfully, people often report that positive opportunities and experiences begin appearing more naturally in their lives, while old problematic patterns gradually lose their magnetic pull. Benefits of mastering mental gravity shift include increased ability to attract desired experiences and relationships, reduced tendency to recreate old problematic